Thank you, Leona. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to Cabinet, and we'll start the meeting. We have quite a long agenda, and we will first of all ask for apologies for absence. First and foremost, I think Leader O'Donnell.
Councillor O'Donnell. Yeah.
Oh, no others. Thank you. And also item 2 then, declarations of interest. None. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 3, General Fund Capital Programme. We'll have a report from the Head of Accountancy, our CFO, Margaret. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. This is the standard General Fund Capital Report, and it's presenting the position statement on the General Fund expenditure as at 30th of September this year. It shows a shortfall in resource of £345,000, and that is 0.86% of available resources. So it's within manageable limits for us. The report advises of a number of movements in the current year capital programme, and the Cabinet is asked to approve these. They relate mainly to timing of projects, and this reflects shortages of materials and labour, as well as backlogs in tendering and site starts dating back to the pandemic. And this obviously impacts on construction costs, and officers are continuing to monitor the position and provide updates on all the various projects. But every effort is still being made to contain costs within original approvals. Forecast expenditure for the year has reduced by just over 14 million since the previous report due to all these various delays, and so borrowing, grants and the drawdown of developers' contributions have all been deferred to align with the revised pattern of spend. Obviously, that will then just roll forward into next year when we are continuing to catch up on those projects. And detailed explanations are in the report on all the reasons for the major movements. So we're asking you to note the report and to approve the various changes that are set out in it. And if there are any questions, we'll do our best to address those.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Any questions? Members? None? None online? No. Okay, thank you, Margaret. We'll move on then to item 4. So this will be the Housing Capital Programme. I believe, again, it's yourself, Margaret. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. This report similarly measures the capital spend for the Housing Capital Programme, again up to 30th September. And it shows a shortfall in resource of £205,000. That's 1.3% of the resources available, and again, that is within the manageable limits. There have been a number of movements, and Cabinet is invited to approve those, but once again, they relate mainly to timing delays due to the significant impact of the pandemic, rising prices, material and labour shortages on both existing and new housing projects. Full details are provided in the report narrative, and due to increasing cost pressures in the construction sector, similar to the General Fund, officers are continuing to monitor the position and will provide updates in future reports. As a result of the changes in timing of projects, new build grant income has been realigned and reduced by 4.2 million in the current year, while borrowing has been increased by 1.5 million, but it still remains within the approved level, and this is just to match the changing phasing and make-up of the projects within the programme. So again, we're asking you to note the report and approve the transfers and movements within the programme. And if there are any questions on this one, as I say, both myself and Paul or Phil from Environment are here to be able to answer.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. And just for the record, actually, just for the previous item, sorry, I should have just noted that the Cabinet approved the movements within the 2022-23 programme and also the shortfall of 0.345 million for the previous item. Thank you. And moving on then to any questions or comments with regards to this item. You okay, Councillor Flanagan? You're right. Yeah. In reading it, obviously, in virtually every item, it says reduced, 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 reduced. And obviously, deferral is a key word as well. I'm assuming this is just prudent financial management, or are there other implications or causes for this, Margaret?
There tends to be a pattern every year, even before the pandemic, where we set up an ambitious capital programme, and whether it's due to external partners not being able to give us time slots and time, or whether there's a backlog of work internally and we've got insufficient resource to actually get the schemes up and running, then there is always slippage during the year, and it's something that every council's been faced with. But the last couple of years, it's been particularly bad because the pandemic and the Ukrainian issues have meant that there've been delays in projects, partly because people couldn't go on site because of restrictions during the pandemic, and partly because we've had material and labour shortages dating back to the Ukrainian supply issues. So it means that there's a delay. More projects are trying to catch up and come forward at the same time, and there just isn't enough resource and materials available to deliver those. Plus, when we go out to tender on them, the market is at the moment it's quite strong, and the prices are up because of supply and because of fears of risk and further delay on the contractor's part. So sometimes when we go out to tender, it's unaffordable, and we have to go back and rethink the scheme to make it more affordable and go out again. So you can see why delays this particular year are worse than in most other years.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. And well, hopefully, eventually prices may come down, and actually then we may gain and benefit from it in the future.
I would think that we're hoping that they're going to stop rising so fast. I'm not sure how long it will take before they actually come down again. The same goes for interest rates that impact the capital programme. But as I say, we are monitoring it, and we are revising the timing and the phasing of all the projects, and trying to prioritise those projects that really need to go forward quickest, so that we can make sure that our resources are best directed in the current year and next year.
So, I think,
if I could come in on prices, construction prices, Debbie Hill, who's our lead on procurement, works closely with Scotland Excel and other bodies to monitor prices, and we've got a lot of really detailed reports on construction inflation. I think the general feeling is that construction will continue to debate inflation in construction. It might slow down, as Mrs McCrossan said, but there's an expectation it will level out. What we're picking up is, unfortunately, it won't start going down the way, but it might level out in a period of time. But we get quite detailed reports on that. It depends on the materials. Some of it has been COVID related. Some of, for example, steel is linked to the war in Ukraine. So there's a great deal of uncertainty about the actual raw materials for construction, but we do monitor it very regularly, and we'll try our best once things become more stable to build that into our plans.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Margaret. As there's no other questions, comments from Cabinet, well, we are asked to approve the revised level of borrowing to support the programme. Make sure I get the right paper here. And also note and approve the current movements within programme, and note the shortfall of 0.205 million. That income and expenditure on the programme will be managed and reported on a regular basis. Cabinet happy to approve? Thank you. Okay, and I've lost my agenda. Move on to the next item then. which is the Strategic Mid-Year Council Performance Report, and from the Director of Business Operations, Louise, I believe. Oh, Jamie. Thank you.
Good morning. The purpose of the report before Cabinet is to scrutinise performance, mid-year performance, as part of our outcome delivery plan. The outcome delivery plan sets out key activities that services are planning to deliver and achieve against the 5 outcomes of our community plan, with measures, targets and trend data that enable us to monitor performance. The plan also includes contributions from the HSCP and East Renfrewshire Culture and Leisure Trust. Previously, we had a 3-year rolling plan updated annually. However, the current year before you is a transitional plan to take account of the impact of the COVID pandemic and also allow additional time for a strategic planning review. There's a few notes that I would just maybe put to members just to remind them that not all indicators have a mid-year update. About 30 out of the 50 are updated. Some indicators where there is a time lag at reporting at end year are included in the mid-year report. And there is also a different reporting period that relates to educational attainment for the academic year 21-22. Should also note that there are no targets for the education indicators and that the Education Committee considered new targets at their meeting on the 17th of November, and these will be included in a future ODP update. So overall, just in terms of giving a sense of progress, despite the continuing significant challenges of the post-COVID environment that the Council is operating in, the Council has continued to perform well across a number of key areas. Just as we were talking about in relation to education, we continue to see very good performance on attainment levels, although we are cautious of comparing previous years because of the change in methodology that was employed during the pandemic. But we're still, it's very pleasing to see the results that our colleagues have supported young people to achieve. We've also encouraged by increases in physical and virtual visits to libraries. With the current service meeting 51.2% of the end-year target at mid-year. We've also seen that we're meeting targets on affordable housing with 109 units completed. And again, I think members will be well aware of the quality and the standard and attractiveness of those new units. We're also seeing a positive story around support for local economy, again exceeding the end-year target of businesses that were assisted, and also that in relation to sustainability, that we've returned to the top place in Scotland for recycling rates. We're also seeing low levels of recurring antisocial behaviour and high levels of support for people to live at home. So despite all of these positive stories, real challenges remain, especially where performance was impacted by COVID. It remains our ambition to move towards pre-pandemic levels, but there is still much more work to be done. So we've seen a considerable improvement in breastfeeding rates in the most deprived areas, up to 17.9% from 7.5%, but we've still some way to go to get back to the pre-pandemic levels of 23%. We've also seen an increase in leisure centre visits, again, which is very positive to see. However, the level is at 44% at mid-year rather than 50%, so we still want to see that number increase more. And we've also very aware of the increase in staff absence rates, again, as a direct result of the pandemic and the ongoing impact that we're seeing that on our staff. Managers will obviously continue to monitor that closely during the second half of the year. Overall, Council staff and those in the HSCP and the Trust have demonstrated resilience and commitment this year in supporting our communities to deliver key services. They've worked incredibly hard to tackle backlogs and respond to new challenges prompted by the cost of living pressures and increased energy costs. The report also contains, The report also contains an annex on complaints handling, and we have to do a return to the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman and report on our performance in that regard. Overall, we've seen a decrease in the total number of complaints received, 502 versus a previous mid-year point of 919. The majority of our complaints continue to proportionately relate to environmental services, but what we have seen is that complaints handling times are achieving their national targets within that as well. We're continuing to do work in the background to improve our systems and processes around complaints handling. But overall, it's very pleasing to see the reduction in the levels of complaints compared to this time last year. So Cabinet is asked to note the performance that's in the report and invite any scrutiny or questions in relating to the Council's performance. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Any notes or comments from Cabinet? Councillor Craigmills.
Thank you. I have a few comments and just a few questions as well. On the breastfeeding targets on page 44 of the overall papers, I presume that the Council are working with the Health and Social Care Partnership to get back to pre-pandemic levels. It was just to clarify if that was the case. If anyone could clarify that.
Yes.
Okay. And then this is merely a comment. It's great to see the progress in regards to affordable housing in East Renfrewshire. And I was particularly impressed with the Council's commitment to wheelchair adapted and accessible housing. And I very much enjoyed my visit earlier this year. So I would just like to thank all those involved, because this is progress, and quite often those with disabilities feel left behind in the housing market. So I thank the Council for all they have done on this matter. With regards to staff absences, I understand that there is a great deal of burnout amongst our employees, given the stresses of the pandemic, and I know as a Council we are offering support for our employees, but it would be interesting to know if other comparable councils are experiencing the same issues. So, for example, we always compare ourselves to, say, East and Bartonshire, similar in size, so it would be interesting to know if this is a theme across Scotland and across our sector. So if anyone could answer that, that would be much appreciated.
Louise, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Craigmills. Yeah, a corporate management team had a good discussion about absence earlier this week, and it's definitely a cause for concern. Our absence figures for the first time now nationally have changed since July to include all the COVID absence that is in there, so we'll see the figures going up a bit because of that. And we are seeing COVID and long COVID in the top 10 causes of absence for local government employees as well. HR colleagues are telling us that anecdotal data shows there's a number of absences where employees have been absent for a longer period of time. Perhaps they've been waiting due to NHS delays, surgery appointment delays, but the overall impact of that's quite hard to quantify, but we believe that that will be a problem wider. And to answer your specific question, our colleagues are very much working with colleagues other councils. Don't have definitive data today, but we do benchmark with other councils in terms of our absence and the causes of absence, and that is part of some of the personnel forums that we're part of, or HR forums that we're part of, and having a look at that. In terms of top 10 causes of absence, we do have, trying to find it in front of me, stress non-work related is the top cause of absence, both for local government employees and teachers. So there is a lot of support in terms of looking at that, trying to make sure that people are using our employee counselling services, making sure that our managers are aware of the stress in the workplace guidance as well, and that we help staff and colleagues with that. And as you've mentioned, we have health and wellbeing policies. We have the Health and Social Care Partnership has a staff kind of health and wellbeing advisor, and as part of Cabinet's decisions in October for use of COVID recovery funding, we also are bringing in one of those advisors on a temporary basis into the council using that funding. So we're keeping a really close eye on it. We are working with other councils, and we believe our patterns are similar to other councils, and we'll keep that under review. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise, for that really full answer. I much appreciate it.
Thank you. Louise, Councillor Bragg. Chief Exec.
Just maybe a couple of points of clarity. The first one, going back to the question about breastfeeding rates, the outcome delivery plan that we're reporting on here covers both the work of the HSCP and the Trust. So it's essentially reports on where our funding is used. So we will agree with HSCP which of the indicators are linked most closely to the council funding, and those will appear in. Now, it's only a selection of the HSEP. The IJB will go into them in a lot more depth, but it is part of their indicators as part of that sort of council family. And the same in the trust. Some of the indicators will refer to work that's undertaken by the trust. Yeah. And maybe just the other thing on, you used the phrase burnout. I think that's been used quite widely across the whole of the public sector at the moment, in the whole of the UK. I think the impact of the pandemic has been immense on public services. The hours I've spoken many times about the hours our staff have put in during the pandemic. I know many are struggling to even take their holidays, and we have said to them they absolutely have to. The deadline is the end of this year, so you may find some people are off because we're insisting they do take their holidays, and because we do, and we've been talking to the unions about it, but people have been working incredibly hard. But we're not alone. It's right. I definitely know it's the same across the whole of local government in Scotland, because we talk about it at meetings, but I think it's across the whole of the public sector.
Thank you, Lorraine. Councillor Devlin.
When we look at our Q2 data, the Council's overall Q2 absence data was 2.6 days. That's above our target. And in comparison to last year, we've reported an increase of 0.3 days lost per FTE. No, an increase of 0.3 to 2.6 at the moment, but we are projecting, that's only a quarterly figure, we are projecting that will be higher across the year. Just trying to find the actual figure. So that's only a quarterly figure. So the increase, the 6-month figure is 4.96 days lost per employee. And our end year target was 9.5, but we are looking at potentially breaching that target in terms of the addition of COVID absences into the caseload. And that's why the target's at that level, but I think we are looking at having the COVID absence in there, and we believe that because of that and the pressures on the workforce right just now. We're tracking towards that, but we reckon that we will go above our target. So we've been looking at that closely. Keep it under review.
Thank you, Louise. Okay, Councillor Devlin. Thanks for that. I just want to note and echo what others maybe have mentioned, that the appreciation of the amount of work and time and effort, and that we are a definite concern. We look after the employees because they deserve it, and it's incredibly important. Really encouraged to hear, Louise, that you mentioned, I think, the additional recruitment of someone to help the staff cope, and that's very encouraging. But interestingly, Lorraine, you mentioned holidays as well. I'm aware that in other sectors possibly there'll be employees that are allowed to carry over holidays to the next year. Is that allowed within the council policies?
Yes, we can. They can carry over, but there's a limit on that, and that's except in exceptional circumstances. You may get allowed to carry more forward, but employees can carry normally 5. But this year 6, because as part of the pay agreement for local government employees, there was an extra holiday agreed. So people can carry forward. That is quite difficult because it was agreed in the calendar year. Sorry, it was agreed for the financial year, but our holidays work in a calendar year, so it's been a bit complex. But because of pressure in services, we imagine a lot of people will take that in the next holiday year rather than now, but they can carry forward. But we do have a limit on that because we want people to actually take their holidays.
Well, absolutely. That was exactly my thought. And at least it means, if people know they still have the opportunity to take the time to time off and recover. That's what holidays are for, isn't it? Okay, thank you. And for this item then, I think we're happy. We can move on to the next item. And this is item number 6, and I believe this is for Gillian, and it's the proposed introduction of electric vehicle charging tariff, and it's from a report by the Head of Environment. Thank you, Gillian.
very much. You'll see in the reports essentially that what we are proposing is...
Hi, Gillian, we're struggling to hear you. Your camera's not on.
That's fine. Sorry, just give me a wee second.
It's okay, camera's on now, Gillian.
Right, thank you. Okay, so this is a report where we are seeking authority to introduce electric vehicle charging tariffs for the use of the public EV infrastructure in East Renfrewshire. The background to this has been going on since 2020. Started in 2020 when the government announced there was a commitment to end the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, and all new cars will be fully zero emissions from 2035. So, as you know, we have a relatively limited EV charging facility at the moment. They are generally spread out over the council, but they are under stress at the moment. Some of them are relatively old and require quite a lot of repair, and some of them we've had to replace. So at the moment, we don't have a budget for the maintenance or the replacement of the EV chargers. We received capital money from Transport Scotland to expand the infrastructure. However, it didn't come with any maintenance or replacement money. So the proposal here is to ensure that EV charging can be expanded across the council area. We would have income from charging to expand the numbers and also to ensure that they are properly maintained for the future. So that's the general the proposal is to introduce charging to allow that to happen. In recognition that not every resident has an access to a driveway or a parking area so that they could charge their vehicle from their private house. We don't want residents who don't have access to a parking area or a driveway to have less access to the EV equipment. So what we are proposing is to ensure parity across the board, that those residents would be able to receive a concessionary rate on the charging, which would be limited to what you would pay if you were charging from your home. So I hope you can understand that. It's a wee bit complex. So we've carried out a lot of consultations, and if this is approved, we will need a traffic regulation order covering on and off street EV charging spaces, and this will be advertised for 21 days, so the public will have an opportunity to comment on that. So the recommendation is to approve the principle of the introduction of EV charging tariffs on public EV charging infrastructure in East Renfrewshire, approve the introduction of the overstay charge on EV charging infrastructure, and to delegate the powers to myself to revise these tariff rates and overstay charges every quarter in line with the cost of living inflation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Any questions for Councillor Devlin?
Just a couple of points, Gillian. The charging points, I mean, I don't know many there is in East Renfrewshire, but I believe there's about maybe 10, 12. Am I right in saying that? Points. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. Barheads.
Yes, there's as I say, there's not a huge number across the area, so in Barrhead, they tend to be in places like the Foundry or the car park behind the Barrhead headquarters. You know, that's a kind of areas.
Just, I mean, how do we stop the public using the ones behind, say, the headquarters in Barrhead? I mean, are they still going to be free to their own staff? Or will that be a charging point as well?
Do you know if they're on the, sorry, are you talking about the very small car park at the back of the Barrhead offices? Or are you talking about the big car park where all the staff park?
I know the one in the Foundry, I mean, we can put a point in, you know, a charging mechanism in that, but the one behind the headquarters, is there going to be a charging point within that as well?
Well, if we get approval for this report today, then we will be looking for additional areas where we will put additional EVs in, Councillor Devlin. So if this goes forward, then we'll be looking for additional sites. So we could certainly look at that.
Sorry, but their own fleet of cars, will there be a charge associated with them?
Okay, that's a different proposal. To be honest, this is for the public EV,
yeah.
So members of the public to use. There is ongoing work that Andy Corey's team are looking at in terms of where the council's vehicles would be charged. So I think Andy Corey might have more information than that. So I'm talking about the public.
Yeah, I understand that, but I mean, obviously their own vehicles are going to use them as well.
Well, do you want to ask that question of Andy? So I don't have that information.
The ones we have are mainly at the depot, so they're obviously protected, so that's a secure area, so we wouldn't be charging for those ones. We do have one at Eastwood Health Centre, which I guess the public could use, but it's mainly for staff to use it, and if our car is plugged in there overnight, then the public probably wouldn't get access to it anyway, so it's probably controlled by the fact there's cars at the properties and would be using them inevitably anyway, I would say.
I'm asking that as I've seen a few cars at the Barrhead one. I don't know whose cars they are actually using the points.
That's the front two of the car park. Yeah, so they're open to the public. There's no way of securing them. There's not, to my knowledge, permanent electric vehicles based there. So, yeah, they would still be open. But that's ones that you could consider for charging. I don't know if there's a way around. I mean, when you're using the staff one, that it just goes onto an account somewhere and somebody pays for it. So I guess there's options there. But if the public,
just on that point, if there was an issue, for example, in relation to the Barrhead building, it's easily fixable in terms of restricting access. It wouldn't be a problem to us.
And I think actually, Councillor Devlin, that they're also smart devices. That, you know, they're connected, and I think that the ability to control them, you know, whether it's via a card or, you know, an app.
Yeah, I understand. The model one.
I think some of the ones I've used, you have to go via the Charge Master app. Like, so it's actually the cost of it or the use of it is controlled by someone.
Yeah, I don't know. Ones in the Eastwood side, I only know the use of the ones in the Barrhead side, and I believe that the two behind the council building within Barrhead are just plug in.
So can I just with the public facility, there will be they will be at Charge Place, Scotland. So you would need a card, you would need to be registered, your home address, etc. And you would be charged for the electricity used on the public EV infrastructure that we're discussing today. I hope that helps.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Councillor Pagan?
So if we approve this paper today, I understand that recently a neighbour in South Lanarkshire approved similar charges. Do we have an estimate of how many chargers from this revenue we could add to the fleet? Do we have an estimate? So would it be an extra 2, 3? How many do you reckon that we could get from this charging for this service?
I'm going to be very honest with you, Councillor, that at this moment in time we don't know. I reckon we would need to do an assessment after maybe year one to indicate how much of an income we would actually achieve. So obviously at the moment EV charging is free, so we're introducing tariffs, and that may change how people charge their car. They might decide to do a home charger rather than use the public infrastructure. So I think we would need to wait for at least a year to see what the implications are of the charging and the tariffs before we can actually see how much we would be able to use for repair and expansion of the network. At this moment in time, we don't have anything to expand the network, so at the very least, we would have in the future money to do that, which I think is positive.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Prydell. Well, I think it's worth noting in the paper it does say that for the next financial year, we anticipate that the government are going to take the lead and actually provide funding for local governments to invest. I think this is the right thing to do, clearly, because I'm very encouraged to see that there's many people whom we want to encourage to have electric vehicles but may not have a driveway or live in flats or different types of accommodation who won't have access to have the ability to install their own charger. And I think there's many properties in East Renfrewshire which already will have home chargers, and the fact that we're pricing it in such a way that it will be cheaper for them to charge at home because of their own tariffs, what they pay for their electricity. So that's a key thing, because then the people who get to use the public chargers that we provide are the people who need them probably the most, because they don't have access to one at home. And I think because again the overstay charges, that's something I actually just wanted to clarify, because obviously you get the different types of stations where you get the sort of ones where they do 7 to 22 kilowatts, and I think the intention is after 3 hours to potentially charge people extra on that. One thing that does concern me though is that there's because they charge at a lesser rate, it takes longer to get a full charge. So what it does mean is some cars will maybe only get to 30-40% and then have to move on, or face more charges. So I agree with you on the other type of station which can go up to beyond 50 kilowatts or whatever. Within an hour, with that kind of charging capability, you'll actually get a full charge. So somebody should move on from there. Any thoughts on that, Gillian?
If you look at page Appendix A, which is on page 67 of the papers, Table A2, the fees for overstays are there. And obviously with the standard, which is a 7 kilowatt or a 22 kilowatt EV, there's a £1 per minute after 180 minutes. And for the rapid charger, it's £1 per minute after 60 minutes. And that's reflecting, the different speeds that you would charge for. Okay.
Well, yeah, I agree with the ones for the fast chargers, because they also have the ability to charge cars that can't charge at the fast rate. And the danger is actually that someone uses one of the fast charging units who is then going to leave their car there for hours. Some people do leave them overnight, so it's important to allow the cars that have the capability to charge fastly do have that capacity, and encourage other people who can't charge at the higher rate to go to the other units. But the key thing is actually to have more units, obviously.
Obviously, yes. But in the meantime, charging for overstaying is another way to control that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Devlin.
Gillian, could there be, obviously the more points you put in, the more money you could generate, but could there possibly be an income for the council with the charging mechanism?
Well, yes, but what we're proposing to do with the income is to expand the network and use some of the income for the concessionary rates for residents that don't have access to driveways or private parking areas. And also for maintenance, sorry. It's an important one.
Okay. Well, thanks. I think the important thing is that to do today is to agree in principle the introduction of the tariffs and also the overstay charges, and then also delegate. It's important to review them, obviously, on a regular basis. So is Cabinet happy to approve? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gillian. Okay, we'll move on to item number 7 now, which is the proposed lease of the units in Robertson Street and Barrhead, and this, I believe, is going to be Phil Dawes. Thank you.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to ask the Cabinet to consider and, if appropriate, approve a proposed lease to the men's shed of 4 units at Robertson Industrial Estate. The men's shed have occupied the 4 units under a standard commercial tenancy agreement with the council since 2016. For those that don't know the men's shed, they have a long-standing history of delivering services in Barrhead. It's a charity run by voluntary members which offers a space for men and women to take part in woodwork, light craft and a variety of other activities. They have a broad membership with over 60 active members. In 2019, they wrote to the council seeking a long-term lease at a peppercorn rent of £1 per year. Their request for the long-term lease was prompted as a number of their funding streams from the National Lottery were coming to an end in spring 2022, which put the future of their facility under threat. They have requested a 25-year lease, and Cabinet are asked to consider, if the lease should be granted, what an appropriate length of lease would be and whether that should be 25 years. In determining this issue, there are some implications noted between paragraphs 22 and 27 of the paper, which I will cover in a moment. Paragraph 12 notes the proposed terms of the lease. Paragraph 15 does note if the council were to re-let the units on the open market, we could achieve a rent of between £22,000 to £25,000 per annum. So if this lease were approved, we would be disposing of the lease at less than market rate. Disposals at a rate below the market value are governed by legislation, and the legislation stipulates the circumstances under which a local authority may dispose of land for consideration of lower than the market rate. That includes taking into account whether a proposal would bring benefits such as economic development, regeneration, public health and social well-being, or environmental well-being. Given the charitable nature of the Barrhead Men's Shed, we believe that the lease would fall into that criteria. I would also note that paragraph 22 of the paper notes that in April 2022 the Council approved a paper outlining the policies and procedures that we should take into account when a commercial lease is granted. That paper stated that a lease would be granted at £1 a week for up to a period of 52 weeks, and thereafter a market rent would be charged. So if this were approved, the approval to seek a lease of 25 years at £1 a year would step out with that current council policy. What I would note, however, that the negotiations of the renewed terms of the lease did begin in 2019, some 3 years earlier than the implementation of the policy in April 2022, which could be the rationale for stepping out of the lease because the negotiations began before the proposed lease was agreed by Cabinet. Over the period, the Men's Shed have worked alongside the Council to present the need for the facility and the benefits it would develop to the community. So to conclude, the proposal is to renew the lease between the Council and the Men's Shed for a period to be agreed by Cabinet at a peppercorn rental of £1 a year, which would allow the established charity to continue the services it currently offers to the wider local community, and I'm happy to recommend the report to Cabinet.
Thanks. Just a point for noting, this was agreed in principle with the last administration in regards to the 25-year lease and the peppercorn rent. Just a important point to note. Sorry, I'll rephrase that, from a political level, not officer level.
Right, just to confirm, there was no paper up unless...
No, there was no paper.
There was no paper, so therefore no agreements, no approvals can ever be given outside. It's got to be a formal meeting of the Council. No, so while there may have been a political discussion, there's no agreement. Yeah.
Councillor Praggle.
I think it's clear that the Men's Shed and Barrhead do an excellent job and serve the community of Barrhead very well. I would be happy with the £25-year lease, £1 a year. I think that's appropriate. I think we should be doing all we can to support our charities in East Renfrewshire. And I also believe that the legal terms stipulated are very clear, and that it mentions that they can't sublet, for example, and that if there's terms of which it has to be opened. So I think from a legal perspective, it's set out very clearly the terms of this lease, and I would be happy to support a 25-year lease for £1 per annum.
Thanks, Councillor Praggle. I had similar thoughts about, obviously, the fact that it is a very good cause and it's a very good organisation. Interesting, you also touched on the legal aspects. I'm assuming legal officers would agree with Councillor Praggle's comments about, from the Council's perspective. Jerry?
Yeah, but we're satisfied that the lease is appropriate legally, and that we can put in place the appropriate guarantees for the Council's benefit within the lease documentation.
Thanks, Jerry. Lorraine?
Sorry, could I may be missing something. It's just a point of clarity for the record. I'm looking at point 6, which says 10,000 a year per annum, and I think, Phil, did I pick you up correctly that you talked about 25,000 an annum would be the rental? Just for clarity. And also when we reviewed these papers, we also discussed what, Jerry, can you help me with what state aid is now called? It's not called state aid. I don't think it's been confirmed in the paper, but I did ask the question that this would be under whatever that new state aid. So I'll go to Phil first and then Jerry, maybe just to help guide Cabinet in both of those.
Okay. Paragraph 6, passing rental. The rental that the Men's Shed are charged at the moment is £10,000 per annum. However, the Environment Department and HSCP have covered that charge for them. So although that is the charge they are required to pay, the Environment Department and HSCP have made that payment for them. So they aren't required to make a payment at the moment. If the units were to be leased now on the open market, then the 25,000 figure, the 22 to 25,000 figure, is the amount the Council would receive.
As regards state aid, as of 2023, new legislation will come in, given our departure from the European Union. We're now subject to what's called subsidy control. The figures that are being talked about in terms of this particular scenario fall within the acceptable levels, so we wouldn't be in breach of any subsidy control regulations.
You happy with that?
Yeah, I think it's just missing from the paper, so perhaps colleagues can make sure that's minuted.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, well, I think we've asked all the questions, and there's been, well, from others also regarding this. So it's for the Cabinet to, if appropriate, approve the proposed lease, determine the length of the lease, and to delegate to the Head of Environment in consultation with the Chief's Officer for Legal and Procurement to finalise the negotiations and then conclude the proposed lease as Cabinet Agreed? Okay, thank you. And do we have to state as well or agree that it's the 25 years? Do we have to mention that? And with the 10 years option, opt-out, I think it is. Is that the right term? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. So for business operations and partnerships, we have two types of charges. We have registration charges and we have Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme administration charges. Registration charges for births, deaths and marriages are primarily statutory charges that are set nationally by National Records of Scotland. So the Council actually only has discretion to change the non-statutory elements of that which relate to marriage. So we are recommending here that we keep those non-statutory registration charges in line with inflation and the figure that we've been given by colleagues in finance. We will monitor those charges closely because if we continue to put charges up, there is a chance people will go elsewhere for their marriages or use different premises for their marriages. So we monitor that quite closely. But we are recommending here an increase in line with inflation. For financial year 21-22, for the first time, we introduced charges for administration of the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme. There are protections in place for those who would struggle to pay that, but we have suggested a below inflation rate increase to those administration charges as well in today's paper. Happy to take questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. Any questions or comments? Councillor Bragdon?
I welcome the fact that there is elements of discretion involved for those who can't afford. I mean, the Duke of Edinburgh scheme is an excellent scheme that's been going and running in our schools for many years, and I believe it's important that no one should have a barrier faced when accessing this scheme. So I appreciate the Council taking this into account, and I know it's always on a case-by-case basis as well. So I appreciate that, and I think that's really important going forward, that we're not excluding any pupils from this scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Bragdon. Councillor Devlin? You took the words out of my mouth about Duke of Edinburgh from personal experience, and obviously, without it not being a barrier for other, because it is an excellent thing for the children to do. I think this is a question that's going to come up. Well, it's the figure in terms of 12.3% appears to be our, and I like that Louise immediately looks at Margaret. Can you, is that where things currently are, Margaret?
Yes, every year when we're doing this exercise, we look at the inflation figures in September of the year, and for the general uplift in fees, we take a weighted average of RPI and CPI. So we look at what the retail price index and the consumer price index are for September of the year, and we take a figure which is averaging those out. So the 12.3 is what the combination of the RPI and the CPI figures were in September this year, and that's, as I say, when we snapshot the uplift to apply for next year's budget. It's our normal practice.
And that's a key thing you mentioned there, obviously, next year's budget as well. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And actually, is that against other councils? Is it typical? Is that going to be the same across the country? Or are we different or in any way?
Each council can choose to do what they like. As Louise said, all these charges are discretionary, and every council will make up its own mind as to what's affordable and what's reasonable. It's when we apply those charges, there's actually a huge amount of guidance and work that goes on in each department before they determine any charge. They have to consider the reason for the charge, whether they're trying to raise money, cover costs, encourage participation. There's the concessionary element, and you have to take into consideration whether a particular charge put up at a certain rate will result in perhaps a reduction in overall income because people determine not to use the service because of the price. All that has to be modelled, so it tends not to be a blanket. That is the figure that will be used for everything. Every individual charge is scrutinised to see whether that level of general uplift is appropriate or whether something else is more appropriate. And when you go through the other reports, you'll find that they don't all go up by the same amount, and that's because we have to take lots of factors into account.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, and obviously the statutory, non-statutory element, I understand that. One thing that just immediately in this appendix stood out to me was that the statutory registration increase went up 50%, from £30 to £45, for example, for the married and civil partnership notice forms. That's nationally agreed, obviously. I haven't scrutinised all the numbers within all the other papers, but is that typical?
National Records of Scotland have not uplifted their registration charges for about a decade now, so this is the first time that we've seen them do that. So I think that's what's accounting for quite a large uplift in their charges, because they don't tend to do that normally. Thanks.
It's quite significant then, obviously. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, and so for the first paper, Cabinet, any other questions? No. Happy to note the statutory fees that are set and the increase in all non-statutory fees and the increase in the existing administration charges for Duke of Edinburgh. Thank you. Move on to the second item of second part of number 8, and I believe this is Mark for education, or is it Mary? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So the report for education summarises the findings from our annual review of chargeable services within the department and makes recommendations on charging levels for next financial year for each of the 5 service areas considered. As members will be aware, there are limited opportunities within education to charge for services, given national policy commitments such as universal free school meals for most pupils in the primary sector and the removal of charges for instrumental music tuition. So turning to the recommendations in the report, a 20p per meal price increase is proposed for paid meals in primary and secondary schools from the start of next school year. This represents around a 8.3% increase, but probably worth noting in terms of the primary sector, that proposal may be superseded by the further rollout of universal free school meals to primary 6 and 7 before next August. Whilst the proposed increases for school meals are below the rate of inflation, they are made in the context of the wider cost of living increases impacting on families, and also with a view to minimising any reduction in uptake, particularly in the secondary sector as a result of a further price increase. Within early years, the meal charge proposed would only apply to meals purchased when children are accessing additional hours over and above their statutory entitlement of free early learning and childcare, as all meals and snacks provided when accessing the 1140 hours of ELC are provided free of charge in line with that policy. Sticking with early years add-on sessions, the report also recommends increasing the core charges for each age group by the rate of inflation, with the differing rates charged reflecting the differing staffing ratios needed to be in place to support these very young children. The proposed new rates for add-on would still see the service subsidised, and based on current benchmarking data, charges would still remain below those charged by neighbouring authorities and also the private sector. We're also proposing for next year to introduce a 25% sibling discount for families accessing add-on services from August 2023. Further supports that we have in place, such as the Early Years Intervention Group, also allow the department to respond and support children and families who need our help most. And that can include, for example, granting additional free early learning and childcare hours over the statutory entitlement, or indeed funding nursery placements for younger children, if that is deemed appropriate. An inflationary uplift is proposed for the additional instrumental music services offered, and a price increase is also planned in respect of the very limited capacity we have to sell seats on some of our school transport routes. The report also proposes that charges for pupils from out with East Renfrewshire who attend any of our specialist provision continue to be set to recover full costs. So in summary, Cabinet is asked to approve the recommended increases for next financial year as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any questions, Councillor Bragdon?
Can I ask for the provision of pupils with additional support needs out with the local authority? Would these, we're talking charges of like 21,000 for Carlybar Communication Centre, are these paid for by neighbouring local authorities? Who are these paid for? I'm concerned that they're not paid for by parents and they're subsidised in another way from out with.
No, it would be the neighbouring authorities, depending where these children are resident. And similarly, we receive charges from other authorities where we have to use their specialist provision. So it's a...
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bragdon. Councillor Devlin?
Just a question in regards to the free school meals for primary school kids. When is that going to roll out? Is it next financial year?
So we don't actually have a date as yet for that, but it could potentially be before next August, but we don't actually have
before next August. So it's not next April, it's next August.
We don't actually have clarity on that at the moment, but we are expecting it.
Is there no way, like say obviously there's the increase in for 20 pence per meal for primary school kids? Obviously that's going to come in April. Can that not be put on hold until we see when the rollout's going to be?
So at the moment it's proposed to come in from next August. So it might, as I say...
So it's not April?
No.
No, that's, you've answered my question, sorry.
Thank you.
I'll shut up.
Thank you, Councillor Devlin. Microphone, Danny, if you can remember. Please. Thank you. Okay, any other further questions? Okay, so Cabinet is asked to approve the recommendations in Service Area 1, Catering Service, Service Area 2, Add-on Sessions, Service Area 3, Instrumental Music Service, Service Area 4, Provision for Pupils with Additional Support Needs, who reside without the authority, and Service Area 5, School Transport Privilege Place. Cabinet happy to approve? Okay, thank you. So the third part of item number 8 now is moving on to, I think, Andy Corey.
Thank you.
For the Environment report on from Environment. Thank you.
Okay. Before I commence the introduction of the paper, can I just point to an error in the paper regarding charge number 33 on page 104, which is the Garden Waste Scheme permits. The increase in garden waste permit charging from £40 to £60 was a late adjustment to the paper, and by error does not currently appear in the main body of the report. That's under 2B, service increase of greater than 12.3%, which is on page 90. So that should have been reiterated on that section. The proposed charge is one of a number of options to fill our budget gap for future years and is presently being given consideration as part of our budget engagement process. Normally, budget options will be considered at the Council meeting on March the 1st, but this would not allow staff enough time to prepare for the sale of permits prior to the start of the new financial year. If Council was minded to increase the charges for 23-24, so Cabinet members could consider delaying a decision on this charge until the budget consultation process is complete and the Scottish Government settlement is known. Our paper and other elements of the garden waste scheme will be brought to the January Cabinet, and Cabinet could determine the specific charge at that meeting, if you're agreeable. I'm just asking if you wish to offset the decision today, and I'll bring back a paper in January, which will cover both the options for additional bins and the charging permit scheme.
I think Lorraine's going to come in.
No, it was just for clarity, Andy. I'd expect to go through the whole paper, and then can we come back to that one at the end, although you may have made your decision anyway, but if we discuss charging generally, and then specifically focus on that at the end, so we could do the rest first, maybe.
Okay, thank you. The paper advises Cabinet of the Environment Department charging for services review and seeks approval for the new fees and charges outlined within. There are 5 increases of over 12.3%, not including the garden and waste permit. That includes supply of bins for new developments, road occupation permits, road opening permits, skip permits, and road inspections in new developments. There are 3 removals of service. That's mainly because they're rarely used. That includes dead animals, drop curbs, and no parking cones. And there are 9 new charging services, which include road occupation and road opening permits, skip permits, animal boarding licensing, pre-apps for planning, discharge of conditions and variations, again for planning, street naming and numbering, and short-term let licensing. The heads of service are all available should you wish to question any of the new fees and charges that have been introduced. Yes, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Okay, any questions for Cabinet? From Cabinet?
Just one question, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Just one question, Andy. The new development, the bins, is it not the right of the developer to obviously give the new residents bins?
Yes, that's the charge we would impose on the new developer. In very few cases, though, Councillor Devlin, sometimes the developer passes that on to the resident, the new resident. Yeah. So we've had that in the past. So we have to put it in for residents and developers just in case that occurs.
Sorry, can I ask the percentage of developers that don't contribute to it?
It rarely happens. It's normally the developer that pays for
it. Councillor Bragdon.
Service 33 of the garden waste permit, I think it would be I agree with your recommendation. It would be more appropriate to see what the result of the consultation is and what budget strategy group decide, given that we haven't yet got our budget from the Scottish Government yet. So I would propose that I'm happy to accept all the other proposals apart from the garden waste permit, subject to what happens at budget strategy group, the settlement from the Scottish Government and the consultation from the public.
Could I just confirm the timing of that? Normally what would happen is we would get a settlement from the government and we'd come to the council in March with savings and other adjustments to our budget, which is still the plan for this year. Unfortunately, in this case, we will not have the opportunity to put up the charge in March because it will be too late. The teams, so it will have to be done. If it's going to be done, it will have to be done at the latest at the January Cabinet. So just for clarity in the process, at that point, Council will not have looked at the budget, but councillors will be aware of what the budget is and will have that information. Margaret will have shared that information with all the councillors, what our settlement is, and we will do our best to make councillors also, all councillors, aware of what the feedback from the consultation on that particular item is as well. We can build that into the paper that comes up, so councillors will, on Cabinet, have the opportunity to make that decision based on a bit more information, albeit they won't have the full information on the budget.
Thank you. I'd imagine actually where things that we already charge for, which are obviously going up, and we've talked about the figure and why. I'd imagine where it might be controversial in East Hampshire, where new charges have then been applied to things that people didn't have to pay for previously. Andy, see, in terms of those, like they're listed in, is it F on page 94? Typically, is there a large volume of each of those services? Would you know off the top of your head, like, is it going to raise a significant amount of income, the new charges, or not? Or
Without going through them one by one, no, there's none. I mean, for example, animal breeders and pet shops, that was a new legislation that came in, so it caught smaller establishments in that, so no choice but to bring that in, but it's not a great number. Obviously, street name and numbering depends on new developments in the area. Road occupation permits are not only paid for by the contractors in any event, not huge numbers. Pre-application inquiry is probably one that might engender some consideration. Gillian's on the call, maybe she could give us more information on what that might entail.
Gillian, did you ask?
Sorry, Andy, you kind of broke up a wee bit. Could you say that again?
Could you give the councillor some information on pre-application inquiries, Jill, bringing in the new charge, what kind of level of income that might generate and the numbers involved?
Thanks, Andy. We get about 800 planning applications a year, sometimes more, sometimes less. The major applications, which is generally large house building sites, they're the ones that take up a lot of pre-application discussions and time. We're always very happy to meet developers because the outcome of that would be a better development on the site, an easier planning application process to go through. However, it does take up resources from not just the planning team. It can be from the roads department as well. It can be environmental health. It can be neighbourhood services regarding, things like location of bin locations for flatty developments. So there is a lot of officer time and effort goes into pre-applications. In the past, there was never any regulations that allowed us to charge for pre-application services, but the most recent legislation we've had, the Scottish Government has allowed council to apply pre-application charges now because of a recognition of how complex the planning application system is now. So in terms of large applications, we would maybe get about 8 to 10 a year. But the smaller applications, if somebody chooses to come in and apply and ask for formal pre-application consultations, there could possibly be up to maybe about 80 to 100. Smaller applications who would also seek pre-application discussions, which we would charge for. So this is new for planning. This is the first time we've ever been allowed to actually charge for pre-application services. So it is quite positive, and the money would be reinvested into the team.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, just Gillian's touched on something that I just noticed. Obviously, just when you look at the new charges, in item 13, for example, current charge is £50.80, but the proposed charge is going up to £159.48. But it actually reflects the time, the officer's time taken to actually do this. And Gillian says, that we've not been able to do this in the past. I think it's a good thing. I don't know if the Cabinet agrees to that or not, but I'm encouraged. But obviously, it's income. I don't know how much of an impact it may potentially have with these charges increasing. But obviously, there's then the people who have to pay it, and their reaction to that. And is this typically, though, more commercial developers and people, for example, road occupation permits isn't something that a person, a public... yeah, okay. So I think that's quite acceptable.
The larger developments, so it is the larger developments that generally seek pre-application discussions because it is very complex. The other thing I would like to see is that we have guidance on the website. We have guidance on the website. Sorry. So if if applicants want to go on, they can find, you know, a very large amount of free information, as the house builders do. But sometimes, you know, they will choose to come in for pre-application discussions, and in those instances, we want to charge for that because of the time taken.
Okay, thank you, Gillian. Cabinet is. I guess I can just make sure I've got the right.
Just
yes, I'm just wanting to. There is quite a significant amount. Yeah.
The one about delaying the decision.
Which one was mentioned by Andy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so is that noted? The one that Lorraine mentioned about. And okay, if Cabinet's happy to approve these. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next one now, which is from HSCP, report by the Chief Officer, which I believe...
Leslie Burden should be online.
Leslie, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Councillor. I hope this report from the HSCP is relatively straightforward. There are a small number of services that are charged for, and these are detailed at paragraph 5 within the report, along with the impact of the 12.3% inflation uplift. We have, however, rounded that up or down to the nearest 5p. For simplicity, the setting of charges is not a function that's delegated to the Joint Board. Under legislation that remains with Council, hence the use of the 12.3 inflation. You can see the impact is particularly significant for Bonneton House residential care, where the charge would increase by £95.80 per week based on that inflation increase. Whilst this is clearly a large increase in itself, it is linked to the ability to pay, so there is some mitigation there. And I think for context, it's important to note that in the current year, residential charges within East Renfrewshire range from £819.50 up to £1,445.85p. So the charge for Bonneton itself benchmarks well. Cabinet should take assurance that the nationally agreed local authority rate that the HSEP pays towards residential care is, however, £719.50, and individuals will pay a top-up to the relevant level of fees. Again, I think it's important to note for a residential care financial assessment, the expected minimum income that we think any individual would have is £182.60 per week, and that's normally made up of pension and pension credit. Individuals do keep a £31 a week allowance as a personal allowance. That's a statutory amount agreed each year, so £151.60 is therefore the maximum top-up that any individual would be expected to pay. Clearly, depending on circumstances, it may be more. As I say, that's the minimum. At its meeting in September, the Joint Board agreed the proposed charges for remit to Cabinet, recognising the impact is significant on our people, and whilst it is an unpalatable increase, recognising that the inflationary increase is the right approach in the current financial climate. At the September meeting, the Joint Board also agreed, as part of the review of the individual budget calculator that will be undertaken in the coming months, it should not implement the contribution element for non-residential care. Scottish Government have indicated quite clearly policy changes around non-residential care charges and also around eligibility criteria, so any change that would be made locally is likely to be short-lived. It would have significant impact on the people that we support, and we believe that any income that would generated, the modelling that we've done has shown that this could generate a maximum of just under 200k, that the actual costs of implementation and the impact on review and those in receipt of care would far outweigh that amount of income generated. So in summary, the few charges that are there are increased by the 12.3%, and happy to pick up any questions.
Thank you, Leslie. Cabinet, have any questions? Councillor Pride? Oh no, sorry, you're happy, right, okay. Okay, I think Cabinet then are happy to accept that. Do we need to actually?
Just to agree the
Yeah, we just need to agree the proposed increase to existing charges. Great, thank you. Okay, and we'll move on to the last part of item 8, part 5, and this is from, I believe, from Gillian, to do with licensing.
It's from Jerry.
Sorry, Jerry. Wrong G.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to seek Cabinet's approval to increase licensing fees and charges for the period 2023-24. I should say that the licensing regime is split into two. This paper deals only with civic licensing, so it excludes liquor licensing and gambling permits. In terms of this particular type of licensing, we are bound to charge fees which allow us to accommodate the service, so we're not allowed to generate an income in terms of the legislation that governs these particular permits. Like many others, the increase in charges is based on an inflationary rate, which is essentially there to allow us to provide the service at the same levels as we've been providing up to this particular point in time. We have, as you can see, rounded down to the nearest pound when we get an odd figure in terms of the appendix, and we believe that the fees proposed will allow us to continue to provide an appropriate service to those who need these licences. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Sorry, slight technical hitch here with things not loading in time. In terms of the purpose of the report, so, any questions from Cabinet? Councillor Devlin?
Thanks. I'm fine with the charging, Jerry. Just one thing. I remember, correct me if I'm right or wrong here, the car washes used to, I think it was a personal licence they used to have to clean cars. Am I right in saying that?
If they're cleaning cars, then it could very well be a street trader's licence, if it's been done in a public place.
Right. Do they still need to apply for that?
They would. Essentially, a street trader's licence is the provision of goods or services in a public place.
Are we enforcing that?
If we're made aware that anybody is providing these services and they're not licensed, we do have a licensing enforcement officer whose job is essentially to take complaints from members of the public or any other person and to undertake their own checks. So if that comes to light through either of those sources, then they'll conduct an inquiry and obviously make the person aware that they need a licence and ensure that if the person continues to trade in that fashion that they get one.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Devlin. Councillor Paddington. Well, I think similar again, where obviously there's new charges, I believe, but the existing charges that will increase with inflation. And if Cabinet's happy to agree, approve. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that ends item number 8, and we'll move on to now item number 9, which is the proposed closure of to 2 council offices over the festive period. And this will come from, I believe, Phil, Head of Environment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully a relatively simple paper. The purpose of this report is to discuss the proposed closure of both Eastwood Headquarters and Spearsbridge office between Christmas and New Year. Ordinarily in the past we haven't closed these 2 buildings, but during the festive period it does see a large number of staff taking annual leave, which can leave the buildings quite substantially underoccupied. In addition, footfall from customers is limited, as many local people choose not to access council buildings for services during this period. These offices, if not closed, still required to be cleaned and heated and require a staff presence for the purposes of security and opening them. It's therefore proposed to close both Eastwood Headquarters and Spearsbridge offices between Christmas and New Year. The offices would close at 2 p.m. on the 23rd of December and reopen on the 4th of January 2023. For the reasons I've already outlined, we think the impact on the public would be limited. Staff that didn't wish to take annual leave that work in these 2 buildings could either work from home if appropriate or base themselves either at the Barhead office, which will remain open, or also at the Eastwood Health and Care Centre, which will be open if that was more geographically convenient for them to locate themselves from. Obviously, the proposal would reduce the council's heating and lighting costs during the period of absence and could save us further savings in relation to staffing and cleaning, and as such, I'm happy to recommend the report to Cabinet.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions or comments from Cabinet? Councillor Devlin?
Just one question, Phil. I'm fine with, the office has been closed, but have they got backup, i.e. phone numbers and contacts during that period? Are they going to be highlighted?
Any staff member that would ordinarily be working in the building that isn't taking annual leave would still be available, and all of the various services would make appropriate.
So they will still be available?
Yes.
Through contacts?
Yeah, individual services would need to make their own individual arrangements to ensure that the services continue to be delivered in the same way that they would if the buildings remained open.
So it's not a complete closure of staff?
No. Closure of the buildings. Staff are not required to take any additional annual leave. We are, and any staff that are working can either work from home if appropriate. The report does say if appropriate. It's not always appropriate for people to work at home, depending upon their job type, and if they don't work from home, they can either work in the Barhead building or the Eastwood Health and Care Centre.
Yeah, problems during the winter with, I'm only using council facilities as an example, housing, and, with heavy rain, you get flooding or deep frost, you get burst pipes, just along the lines, as long as there's contact details.
The usual emergency standby arrangements will be in place.
It's fine.
So if I could just confirm that, we have many staff will be on holiday over Christmas, as you would expect. However, we do have a rota, as Phil said, right across the council of staff that are needed for emergencies. It may not be the person that you normally deal with, but we have the full rota, and I'm sure Phil for housing will be able to give you, tell you who you should contact if you discover something before we're aware of it. But we have a full rota, and we also have our control room who are always on and who can be contacted for emergencies.
Councillor Pragman?
Can I just ask about the registry of deaths, because I know that can be very upsetting during the Christmas and New Year period, registering deaths. So, can I confirm that that won't be affected because they can go to the Barhead office, or they can do it online? If Louise could confirm that.
Yeah, again, that will be part of the list of contact details that we'll have available, but services will still be running from the Barhead Centre, and there will be customer first provision and registration provision as appropriate. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Pragman. Chief Exec.
Really, the main change in this is the closure of the buildings, but staff can work in Barhead. So going back to Councillor Devlin's point, but also that what we're asking staff if it's not suitable to work from home, and for many it might not be, especially during the Christmas period when there's family around, but they can go into the Barhead building and use that. So we're just really closing the buildings rather than changing the service levels.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's a key thing. Sorry, Margaret.
It's just worth adding that many of the staff are working on a hybrid basis at the moment, so perhaps half of the week they're working from home anyway in certain teams, and the normal is that they're always available on email, and their work phones will divert to mobile phones, so you shouldn't see any difference.
So I think ultimately the building's going to be closed, but actually some staff will be on holiday and take the opportunity because they can do so, but there'll be cover because others won't actually be on holiday, but just won't be physically working here, and possibly in other council offices or at home. But the levels of service obviously is the key thing, but that's something. Communication is just to the public, actually, to make sure that no one just turns up, thinking that how are we communicating it out via social media, the usual, the fact that the offices are actually closed? Louise?
Yeah, we'll make sure the communications team do that. In the run-up to Christmas, we do that anyway. We do publish all the hours and that council buildings will be open, where people can get access to services, and what happens if something happens on a public holiday day or at the weekend. So that'll all be part of that, and we'll make sure councillors get access to all of that as well.
Well, hopefully you're the least of our worries in terms of that. Okay, thank you. So is Cabinet happy to approve? Thank you. Great. Okay, and there's now an additional item. I don't have my agendas. That's been added as a supplementary paper, and this is the.
It's the paper that Gillian will lead us through regarding the options for the School Street project outside of Givenwick Primary, and Gillian can take us through it.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine. I've actually found it now. Great, Gillian, please, if you could take us through this.
Yep, thanks. So the purpose of the report, as it says, is to update on the outcomes from the first ever timed traffic restriction, which I'm going to call a School Street from now on Academy Road at Gifford Primary School, and to look at future options for the development of a policy for future school streets. So the background to this started obviously during COVID, and Education Department made the decision to close the playgrounds. Now, that wasn't a particular issue across the board. However, Academy Road is a one-way street and is very narrow and has a very narrow pavement. So the roads team had some concerns regarding conflict on the road, and as part of that, and also to do a trial of a school street, they decided to do the first ever school street on Academy for an 18-month period, so that we could assess the outcomes from that. So what we have on the street at the moment is an 18-month temporary traffic order, which went from June 2021 to 6th of December 2022. So it's obviously coming to an end very soon, hence the report. So what we are proposing, well, actually, before we go on to what we're proposing, I would like you to look at paragraph 9, because paragraph 9 indicates the outcomes that came out of the first school street. So the measures indicated a slight increased rate of active school travel to and from the school. The measures were very positively perceived by the majority of the school community and also local residents. There was a slight reduction in the number of motor vehicles using Academy Road during the restricted period. So it was kind of like a 45 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes in the evening, where there was this restriction in place. So there was minimal overall. There was a slight reduction in the number of vehicles using Academy Road during the restricted period, which you would expect. And there was a minimal reduction in the numbers overall during the total vehicle count period. And that suggests that some people just adjusted their time as to when they travelled. So as part of the school street, the local residents received permits because as it's a public road and as they have access onto that public road, we can't stop residents from accessing the road and going about their business. So there was limited traffic on the road, but overall there was no real conflict between the cars and the parents and children. So to move forward, because we have this closure coming up on the 6th of December, where the temporary traffic order will fail under the coronavirus legislation from Transport Scotland. We have contacted Transport Scotland and they have indicated that because the order was done under the coronavirus regulations, it can't be extended. The temporary coronavirus order cannot be extended beyond the 6th of November. So if we go to the recommendations if we go to the options at paragraph 11 and 12, there are two options here that we're asking you to have a look at and make a decision on. So option 1, which is at paragraph 11, so that notes the ending of the existing temporary traffic order at the road, and which means that the school street would stop on the 6th of December, and also the proposal to develop a policy for future use of school streets as per paragraph 2 above. So the benefit of this option is that it would allow the development of a policy and assessment criteria to use when considering school streets prior to any permanent road orders being promoted at the school. That would mean there would be no risk of a precedent being established in advance of the policy being developed and being considered and agreed. The second option, which is at paragraph 12, in order to try and stop the temporary order finishing the school street in December, we are proposing that we apply to the national authority, which in this case is Transport Scotland, to apply for a continuation of the existing restriction on a permanent and uninterrupted basis. The road service would therefore be required to promote a permanent traffic order so as to continue the existing restrictions with no alterations to their existing current provisions. So it would be the same 45 minutes in the morning for the school street and 45 minutes in the evening or after, about 4 o'clock for coming out of school time. So that is essentially the two options. The second one also has the development and of a policy and assessment criteria to be considered and agreed by Cabinet. So if it's relevant, we can roll some of the school streets across other schools within East Renfrewshire. So it is important to note that if option 2 is the preferred option of the Cabinet, then no further timed traffic restrictions at schools should be considered in advance of the policy and the assessment criteria being agreed. Should option 2 be chosen, then it would also be necessary to subsequently assess and reconsider the suitability of Academy Road against the final agreed policy and criteria as well. So the rest of the report outlines the consultation and the partnership working, and also the implications of the proposal at paragraphs 19, 20 and 21.
Okay, thank you, Gillian. Okay, any questions or comments from Cabinet? Councillor Devlin.
Sorry, just hopefully a question, not a question. Basically, I'd rather go with option 2 to seek approval from Transport Scotland to continue.
Thanks, Councillor Devlin. Councillor Prigden.
Option 2 would be my preferred option too, as well. I believe that this actually does predate COVID. There's always been an issue at Giffnock Primary School, I think as far back as 2019. So I think this is only right, and I know it will be supported by residents and the school community. Okay,
thank you, Councillor Prigden. I think it's appropriate as well that either option involves the creation of a long-term policy for us to be able to control this, regulate it, and allow other schools, if appropriate, to put forward a case for it to be something that they would like to do. Chief Executive.
Yeah. Just for clarity, option 2 is that we wait. We go to the Scottish Government and we would have to get their approval. So we'll let you know if there is an issue with that. We go. But it's not asking schools to come forward at the moment. It's saying we will develop a policy before we will consider any other school. So just for clarity in that, that we are not expecting other parent councils to come forward. We need to develop the policy after this.
Thank you.
Understood. Yeah, and we attend quite a few parent councils. We make sure that we communicate this to them. Yeah, but it's something for the future, and at least with option 2, we can continue the current. Well, actually, that's something that occurred to me. Is like it says to option 2, part 1 is to instruct the road service to go to Transport Scotland, not Scottish Ministers. Is that the same, or? Joy?
The national authority for roads is Transport Scotland, so it is Transport Scotland that we go to, and we've made contact with them already, just to get their advice, on the suitability of going to Transport Scotland. So they are the right person to deal with.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think it's unanimous then. Actually, option 2 is the preferred option for Cabinet. Agreed. And I believe that is our final item. So,
thank you.
Okay, well, I'll close the meeting. Thank you.